Even though most of his kids have grown up, there are still some rules that Donald Trump's kids are expected to follow. What's it like being the child of the president? We'll let you know what limits they face in their day-to-day life. Before we get started, make sure that you're subscribed for more from the taco. Now, let's begin. Decorating. The Trump family is welcome to make themselves at home in the White House, but there are some limits. You probably know that the first family is allowed to decorate, but Barron doesn't get his pick of any room in the house. The Lincoln Room was once used as an office for former President Abraham Lincoln and is now a bedroom. However, it's off limits to even the first family when it comes to decorating. The Trump family can hang out in the Yellow Oval Room, but they're also not allowed to decorate this room in order to preserve its historical significance. And when they put their personal touches on other areas of the White House, they have to work with a historical curator. Moving in. The older children in the Trump family have all left the nest, so this rule applies to Barron. Typically, the president's spouse and children live in the White House with the president. Obviously, there are a lot of security concerns when it comes to the first family, and this makes sense from both a logistical and financial standpoint. However, Donald Trump bent this rule a bit when he first took office. Barron was attending school in New York. Because of this, he and Melania spent the first 5 months of Trump's presidency living in the Fifth Avenue penthouse. However, they're now adhering to this rule. Preservation. If you thought your parents were fastidious about using coasters and not putting your feet on the table, imagine living in the White House. There are a whole bunch of artifacts in the White House that need to be taken care of, so Barron can forget about draping his coat across the grand piano. The curator of the White House teaches the first family how to properly care for and preserve priceless artwork and other artifacts that are stored in the White House. Living in the White House must be pretty amazing, but Barron has to tread carefully around the historical artifacts. Christmas tree. Christmas is a magical time of the year, especially at the White House. In terms of traditions, this one is fairly recent, but also very important. Each year, the Christmas trees in the White House are decorated with a certain theme. This tradition was started by former First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy in 1961 and continues to this day. The very first theme tree was modeled after the Nutcracker Ballet and displayed in the Oval Blue Room. That means all the Trump kids don't have to worry about decorating the tree with mom and dad, and they won't be able to hang up any of those beloved handmade ornaments that most families use on their trees. Protection. There are plenty of perks that come with being the president, and one of them is protection. The president has a mandatory security force, but the same courtesy is also extended to his family. And yes, this includes his adult children as well. Nearly all presidential families have taken advantage of this, and quite understandably. Both Bill Clinton and George W. Bush even requested extensions for their college student children after they left office. But if you take advantage of this added security, that means you have to play by the rules of the Secret Service. Their protection comes at a price, but it's one most president's children are willing to pay. Windows. There are a lot of rules the president and his family have to follow, and some of them are pretty strange. There are tons of normal things that they can't do while living in the White House or traveling with Social Security. Should one of the Trump kids get a little toasty while in the car, they absolutely can't open up the car windows. It's a strange but real security concern, and it extends to the windows at the White House as well. And for that matter, riding in a convertible is a huge no-no. After the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, the Secret Service pretty much nixed the idea of presidents and their families riding around in convertibles. Additions. The Trump kids may be able to make themselves at home in the White House, but with limits. Let's say that Barron wants to make the swimming pool a little bit bigger. It requires special approval in order to do so. President Obama learned this the hard way when he wanted to convert the tennis court into a space that could double as a basketball court. It took a lot of finagling and approvals before the change could finally take place. Groceries. Have you ever wondered who pays the bills at the White House? It turns out that the president doesn't have to worry about paying the electricity or other utility bills. However, he is responsible for providing his own groceries. That means that if the Trump kids want to visit their dad, he's the one who will be paying for their meals and snacks. They also have to pay for their own personal items, just as if they were living anywhere else but the White House. They're also responsible for picking up the moving costs if they do decide to move in. Private school. We mentioned earlier that the Secret Service tend to take the whole protecting the president and their family thing pretty seriously, so you can imagine what a pickle they would be in if the president's children attended public school. It's a far more uncontrollable environment with many many variables, so the president's children typically attend private school instead. In fact, there is only one president who has broken this rule within the last century. There was once an exception made for Amy Carter, the youngest daughter of former President Jimmy Carter. She attended Rose Stevens Elementary School, known then as the Rose Hardy Middle School. Inauguration. Part of being a parent is attending all of your kids' various events and ceremonies. Basketball games, award ceremonies, and parent-teacher conferences are just a few of the things that parents are expected to sit through. But when you're the president, you get to force your kids to show up to your events. Perhaps the most obvious of these is the presidential inauguration. It's a pretty big deal, to put it mildly, and that means the Trump kids are expected to be in attendance. Sorry kids, there is definitely no getting out of this one. A grim discussion. There is a lot to get done when a new president first takes their place in the White House. A lot of discussions have to take place as a family, and one of them is rather grim. Within the first week of the presidency, the president has to plan his or her own funeral. It sounds morbid, but it's best to have a plan just in case the worst happens. Having your parent elected president is pretty exciting, but sitting down to plan their funeral is much less fun. Like most aspects of being a president, there are a lot of traditions and rituals surrounding funerals, not to mention the fact that they typically last for about 5 days. Car keys. If you'd rather take an Uber than drive, this presidential family limitation might not sound so bad. Presidents and their family members aren't allowed to drive after the president is sworn in. Like many of these rules, this is done for security reasons. Trump's kids aren't allowed to drive on public roads and instead need to be driven around by Secret Service agents. These members of the Secret Service have been highly trained in evasive and defensive driving maneuvers, so at least they're in good hands. If Barron Trump wants to get behind the wheel of a vehicle, he is permitted to drive a golf cart on private property. However, he would still have to be closely supervised by his security force. Scrutiny. Being chauffeured around by highly trained Secret Service agents is pretty awesome, but there are definitely some downsides to having a presidential parent. Because your parent is in the public eye, so are you, and everything you do is heavily scrutinized. Not only did young Barron Trump have to attend his father's inauguration, but many eyes were on him during the event. In fact, the young boy was heavily criticized for his conduct during the ceremony. His crime? Yawning. Yes, the youngest Trump child looked like he was struggling to keep his eyes open, and people definitely took notice. Beauty regimens. Yes, being the president's son comes with a ton of rules, but Barron Trump does have another parent. His mother, Melania, has some very strict rules that she forces her son to follow. She wants her son to look his very best, so she's careful about making sure that he maintains a proper beauty regimen. When she had her own skincare line, she made sure that he covered himself in her caviar-based products each and every day. But she claims that the fact she wears mostly formal clothes is all Barron's idea because he enjoys emulating his father. In fact, sometimes his mother calls him Mini Donald. Floor limits. For most people, moving into the White House would be an upgrade, but for Barron Trump, it was a whole new set of rules and restrictions. When he was living in their Manhattan penthouse, Barron had an entire floor just to himself. He was free to decorate it any way he wanted. When he was little, he could just scribble away on the walls, which his parents eventually painted over. He's forced to share the second and first floor with his parents, and that's the only space they are truly allowed to redecorate. Let's just say that Barron definitely won't be drawing on the walls of the White House. Gifts. There is a very strange rule that affects gift giving when it comes to the first family. Naturally, the first family is showered with gifts from foreign diplomats, celebs, and others. When a gift is received, it must go to the National Archive to be logged in and appraised. Presents that are valued at $375 and above are considered property of the United States government. They're held in the National Archive, and the first family has the option to purchase them at fair market value. It's kind of weird to have an intermediary for your gifts, and having to buy them adds an extra layer of strangeness. Housewarming gifts. And of course, there is also another added complexity when it comes to accepting gifts as a resident of the White House. Presidents and their families are free to purchase their own gifts from the archives. However, they are not allowed to purchase gifts that are given to the White House itself rather than individual people. It's a subtle but important distinction that has occasionally caused drama over the years. The Clintons once attempted to take some furniture that they thought was theirs, but the paperwork claimed that it belonged to the White House. Do not enter. Just as there there are a lot of rules about living in the White House, there are also a lot of rules about moving in. The president and his family are generally kept pretty busy on Inauguration Day, but there's one thing that they aren't allowed to do. They are forbidden from entering the White House until noon on Inauguration Day. That's because the terms of being president don't officially end until noon on Inauguration Day. But the second your term begins, you're free to move your family into the White House. It's an extremely busy day, especially for members of the White House staff. Making mistakes. The general public may expect the president's kids to be perfect, but Melania Trump definitely doesn't. In fact, she believes that making mistakes is an important part of life and growing up. She definitely wouldn't describe herself as a helicopter parent and instead believes that it's important to give children room to make mistakes. Melania claims that mistakes made as children often translate to lessons that make for happy and well-rounded adults. If you're always picking up your kids when they fall, they might not learn how to do it themselves when you're not around. Language. The members of the British royal family each speak multiple languages, but Melania Trump might give them a run for their money. The First Lady speaks 5 languages, including her native Slovenian. She also speaks English, French, Serbian, and German. Naturally, when Barron was growing up, his mother spoke multiple languages around him, particularly English, French, and Slovenian. As a result, Barron is now fluent in English and Slovenian. This makes it easy for him to communicate with his maternal grandparents in addition to just being plain impressive. Since presidents and their families frequently travel and host international guests, hopefully this multilingual trend will catch on. What do you think about the rules that the Trump kids have to follow? Tell us your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to subscribe to The Taco. Bye for now!